All right, welcome to week 5 for CDC. This week we're going to tackle basically like a wet fly nymph. Some would call some of these versions that we're going to do a flymph. We'll kind of briefly show what we're going to cover, but basically we're going to cover a CDC collar again, kind of like we did, but we're going to go into a little bit more depth. So this is one thing that you can do if you want just to use a single CDC. If you got a material kit, it came with Brahma hen, so you can cut the CDC out and use Brahma hen. Or if you wanted to, you could use like partridge or even a grizzly or a grizzly hen feather would work. And then we kind of have two wrapped one in front of the other, so that all your speckling is on the outside. Whoop! I'm looking at the camera, not the fly. But yet we'll have it to where all your speckling is on the outside, and then we'll cover how to blend them together like this, where it all happens at the same time. So a lot there, I know, and I'll try to reference as much as I can and keep it as short as I can. That said, this type of fly is a lot of fun, and it can give you a lot of experience. Or you can gain a lot of experience, I should say. Just as a fly tyer in general, the rules are so loose on tying something like this, it's not funny. So, with all that said, let's get to it. And I got a size 12 times 1 long hook in the vise. These flies literally can go up to like a size 8. I've seen a couple around a size 6. That's getting pretty big. So the thread I'm using is uni thread, iron gray in 8.0. You can change this up to with whatever colors and everything else. So I'm going to start because we're going to have a lot going on up front, I'm going to start my thread back towards the backside of the thorax, or let it kind of rest at the beginning of the abdomen area. There's several ways to approach this. You can tie the rib on first. You can tie the tail on first. You can tie neither on first. You can work in both from the back if you want a thicker body, if you're working on, say, a size 8. So I can't, to do all that in good time, I can't make that happen. So I'll show you the shortcuts and then let you decide. And I'll try to point out the other end of the shortcuts as we go. So I'm going to tie my rib on first. I'm going to put it to the side, let my thread drag it underneath, and start to pull it back. Clip that out of my way for a second. So there's my rib. If you want a tail, if you want to do a caddis version, you don't need a tail, but if you want it to look like a traditional flymph, is kind of what they're called, which is just a cross between a wet fly and a nymph. Honestly, you can choose whether or not you want the tail or not. If you have a tail, you're going to have more of a mayfly look. Without the tail, it'll be more of a caddis pupa look. And either's fine. So what I've got here is a ringneck, the male ringneck pheasant feather. It comes from the upper wing. And you'll get the same kind of patterning up into the shoulder area. So I'm just going to take a few fibers, and what I like to do, because this stuff sticks, I like my tails messy, so I like to cut that out, lick my predominant index and thumb, twist it around until it becomes kind of messy, and decide how long I want it. I'm going to, excuse me, pardon me. But I typically like to go a little bit past the bend on something like this. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to set that back towards the back like so. I'm going to pinch with my non-predominant hand to set the distance, and now I can wrap this over. Whoop. Again, I'm going to put it on my opposite side and let it roll up to the top. And now I can tie both of these in at the same time coming back. And then I've got my rib and my tail in at the same good grief, I apologize, at the same time. So if you still want your tail to be messy, just make sure that you mess it up before you get to the barb and kind of pinch it in place. Again, so at this point, I'll just kind of stop and explain. You can actually take your thread all the way down, tie in your tail, bring it all the way up, tie in your rib, take it all the way down. These tie-in points can change, like a lot of patterns. It just depends on what you want to do and how comfortable you are doing them. So make sure you kind of play around and experiment with all these different things. There's just a lot of different techniques out there, or at least as far as tie-in points is concerned. And I'm going to get my finer scissors. I need Santa Claus to bring me some new scissors. Or maybe I don't know. Maybe I just find a way to sharpen them. Seriously, my apologies. I've had a lot of rain. There's been a lot of molds and pollens kicked up. Okay, so for the body, again, you can use whatever you want. I want to go with a Antron dubbing from Spirit River in Squirrel Belly. If you got a material kit, this is what came with that. And so I'm just going to stick with that. But you can change all your colors up and everything else. All right. So I'm going to get a little bit of dubbing on. And I stopped my thread just before I got to the tail so that I can take this and slide it down and work my way back to trap the dubbing. And now I can start to twist and use this to form my body. If you bring your thread, again, I think we covered this, but if you bring your thread too far over the back, even with dubbing, as long as your noodle's fine enough, and it needs to be fine. Like when I say fine, not this, that. You can actually kind of swoop it underneath and collect it, and it'll pop it open. Like so, in this case, that one popped it open to a V. And so on something like this, it's totally acceptable. I'm going to take it out because I don't need it, but again, I'm just trying to show you some options and what people have done, can do, so on and so forth. So as you're building your body, you can have a slim body, you can have a tapered body, where it's kind of like a cigar or torpedo shape. You can have I don't know, this is just one of the cool things about a fly like this, is you can really let your imagination run. There's these type patterns, really, it's more of a guideline than it is boundaries. Similar to like streamers, right? If you ever tied big streamers, you kind of have a guideline for big streamers for where the boundaries are. And so I'm just going to kind of work this a little bit and get it up. Might put a little bit of a taper in right at the front. Nope, I need just a touch more. Back that off just a titch. And twist, put my finger there just to build it up a little bit. Okay, so once you've got your body, the goal is to be about 3 bodkin widths behind the eye, or close to 3/16 of an inch. The reason for that is we want to have a lot of room up front, because there's a lot of, and that could also change just depending on how much you want to do up front. But if we're going to add double hackles and everything else, you want to have enough room to make sure that the hackles can flare open accordingly and whatnot. So I'm going to rib this fly. With it being dubbing, it doesn't really matter which way you rib the fly. So you can just choose. And a lot of it gets covered up by the hackle, unless you're just going like one CDC feather. So I always suggest trying to make nice ribbing work. But you can, 3, 4, 5, sloppy, messy rib work is, depending on what you want to do, is not going to play a huge deal here. Because again, a lot of it's going to get covered up. So with what I'm doing here, and if you're following along, which I hope you are, you should have something that looks about like that. We can just trim this out. Okay, so what we need to do now is put in the thorax, or what's more adequately called the prop. The job of the prop is to literally be bigger than your abdomen, which we just put in, and its job is to take the hackle and keep it from collapsing like directly onto the side of the shank like this. We want that prop in there so that it pops it up more like this. You can use dubbing to do this. Say you want to have like a little bit of a color change. You could use some ice dub like this. You could use, I'm trying to think. There's several things that you can use. Typically, dubbing is what's used. In this particular case, I'm going to use ostrich hurl, just because I like the contrast for these particular colors. And plus, ostrich hurl is fun to play with. It's something we haven't touched a lot throughout all the classes. It's going to be dealt with very similarly. Boy, I always hate saying that word. Similarly to peacock hurl, where you're going to have some very fine and fragile tips, and then it kind of gets beefy as you go through the body. So what we're going to do is we're going to trim out the front because those are so fine. And I'm just going to set these kind of in front of where my thread is now, and just place a loose wrap over, bring a few turns forward, and then take a few turns back. Now there's something that you can do called core twisting. You don't have to do this. So once you've done this, you can place it in a dubbing loop. Yeah, and you don't have to do this step. What core twisting is basically taking something like a piece of thread, or even the oval tinsel rib we just used for the segmentation on the abdomen, and you can twist these hurls around there. I know I've covered this on other things, and I have a separate video for it too. But what this does is it reinforces the hurl. It gets it to flare open a little bit. So I'm just going to start here and run it so everything is nice and tight. As tight as possible. I'm going to put my hackle pliers on. And I'm going to start to twist. And you can see how it's all starting to spin up for me. And you can get the toothbrush out and open it up more. Whatever you feel you need to do. Now, one thing you want to be careful of is making sure that you don't over twist. Because right up front here, if you over twist, you're just going to snap the stem for the hurl. So get it pretty close, and then we can start to wrap. And then we can always twist it again later. So I'm going to place a couple of turns in. I'm going to work back into this abdomen just ever so slightly. And now I'll bring it forward. Now with the hurl, you want to take your fingers and kind of keep teasing it to the back. We don't want these fibers being trapped forward. We want them going towards the back more like this. If it's not bulky enough for the size fly you're tying, you can actually uh, after you've created your dubbing loop and you're going to core twist this, let's go ahead and show you real quick. What you can do is actually just bring your thread back, take your thread and capture it all to where you want that to start. Then you can grab some dubbing, and you don't need a lot, because all we're going to do is add basically like a little tiny dubbing ball to help increase the diameter that hurl is going to sit on. And so whether or not the dubbing actually shows through or not is really of no consequence. The dubbing's job is just to take up some space and build some bulk, and that's it. And all you're going to do is just continuously work it over itself until you're just a little bit bigger than the diameter of your abdomen. You can pull all this off. Ice dub is nice because if a little shows through, then you just got a little extra glitter in there. Okay, so say we did that, and now we can wrap our ostrich hurl right over that, and you can see how much larger that just made this. And we don't have to wrap nearly as much. This technique works exceptionally well if you have the tip feathers of ostrich, because quite frankly they're small and they're fragile. Unfortunately, even if you got a material kit, we had to send them out to somebody, and so maybe you got one. So this is a technique that you can use to get these smaller fibers to do this and become larger. So you see that we've got a little bit sticking out front here, and that's okay. Just lick your thumb and index, draw it all to the back, place a few turns in towards the back, and now we have enough room to build our soft hackle or our collar. And you can kind of see there's a little bit of ice dub sticking through there, and that's totally cool. You're probably really not going to hurt anything unless you're going for direct imitation there. So that's an option for you if you need to build a little bulk. So for CDC, so if I go back to my card here, like I've kind of been using a little bit, you can actually get away with coming down a little bit in size. Puffs are kind of out of the deal, but you can come down a little bit smaller on the regular size. I'm sorry that's out of camera. It gets really big. And this looks way bigger than it really is, But you can also use, so basically any of these three, from extra select through the regular sizes. This little puff stuff's not going to work for what we're going to do. And then this is going to depend on how many wraps you want, right? If you only want to make, say, one turn of wrap with the CDC, and you're going to combine that with a different feather at the same time, a smaller one will work okay. Maybe you want to get 2 wraps of CDC and another feather. A little bit bigger one will work well. Maybe you want to do CDC underneath and another feather over top like we were talking about. Again, you can kind of use this one. If you want to combine the two and you're working on bigger hooks, say size 8, you may want some of this extra select. And the extra select just means it's like basically extra big. It's a little bit nicer typically. That's why you pay more for it. Get a drink of water, I'm sorry. It's just that time of year. So, first we're going to just do a single feather, and this is going to work whether or not you want either one of these 2 looks. If I can get my fingers on them. So if you just want, I know this is partridge, but if you just want a single feather look, like this partridge here, and you don't have to use partridge or Brahma hen, you can use other pheasant, or, the options are darn near endless. depending on the size of your hook. Oh, that was the wrong fly. This one. There we go. That looks a little better. So you can do something like this where it kind of resembles almost more of a spider pattern. Or if you want to do just the CDC and you want to get just all the fantastic little bubbles and everything that are going to collect along the side of this and not be hindered by another feather, you can do that. So this will be the single collar version. We're going to tackle these one at a time. So all we're going to do is just like we've done anything else. I'll do it with CDC since that's what the session's on. We're just going to separate and get a middle starting point. So we've got bare stem. I'm just going to line this up on the side of my hook. And I want to make a few wraps over. I'm going to fold everything to the back and tie this in, again, going both directions so that my tip is coming out the back. And we can trim this out. With just a single CDC, you really don't need to cut all this out. If you're using a stiffer feather or a webbier feather to do this, you really do want to come back and trim out all this extra stuff because it's not going to play as nice as the CDC will. But the technique is the same. So we're just going to draw everything to the back, work it forward a little bit. Now, you do want to do what's called doubling the hackle. So we're going to take this. You can see this is the inside part of the stem, the concave side part of the stem. And we're going to just grab these and we're just going to pull them up so that they start to move towards that inner stem. And if you just kind of take your time, you can do that. And you can see how everything has changed on that feather. This works on a bunch of other feathers too. CDC is just more friendly to doing this. So now we can just take this and we're going to start to wrap it. Once you get to a point, I typically do this on the far side. I'm going to place my finger, and I haven't even come around all the way. I'm going to place my finger on the side, and if you watch the stem, it's going to like twist out of my hand. And you see how it twisted. Now what that's doing is it's realigning those fibers in the direction that I'm wanting them to bend. And so now I can come in and place a few more wraps, one in front of the other. And when you do this, you want to tease it out. Don't just make a full wrap and then call it good. Every half turn or so, do the same procedure. And if you're not used to doing this, before you know it, you'll be a pro because it's really not too difficult. I'm gonna go ahead and sneak this on the front side. I'm just gonna tie this off real quick, and then I'm gonna take this out and at least partially. Tie it off, and we'll do this. Matter of fact, I'll just go ahead and take it out, and then I'll just use a different one, and then we'll do it again. And so at this point, all you do is just build a little head, or however big you want your head to be, like so. And that's your flimp using CDC. So I'm gonna go ahead and back all this out. And we're going to do a layered approach, one in front of the other. Ooh. There we go. You gotta really watch for those stray fibers on the ostrich. Okay. So, next we'll do the layered approach. So what I'm gonna do, I guess you could call it the step approach or whatever you want to call it. It's just gonna be a CDC feather towards the back and then a Brahma hen up front. So we're going to basically do the same thing, and You just got to remember not to wrap too many times. So again, the process is going to be the exact same here. We're going to pull these apart until we have bare stem. I'm going to tie this in on that bare stem. Fold it to the back. Tie it in, bring your thread forward, and trim this out. Again, doubling your hackle, folding it over on itself. But this time, when we do it, we're only going to do about a turn and a half, 2 at the most. So we have to have room for that other feather. So teasing out or teasing the barbs out can be a little bit more challenging here because you're not going to be adding as much. So we'll just kind of capture that. I'm not going to fully tie this off, but well, it slid from where I wanted it, that's for sure. There we go. Try it one more time. Tied into the thorax. 1, 2. Now I can back my thread up. That's another thing too. Don't feel like you have to add more wraps. It's okay to back your thread off. So now I've got 2 that are really tight. Oh. Well, I thought they were really tight. I think it was sitting on that other stem just a touch too much. Well, shoot. Come on. You gotta be careful because you don't want to pull too hard on these CDC stems. They will snap on you. Sorry, I don't mean to have my hands blocking the entire camera. Okay, let's get a couple wraps in this time. I'm just going to pinch everything, pull down. There we go, that worked. Sometimes it's just a matter of making it happen. So now we've got a little bit of CDC underneath. We can trim this out. And it'll be no different for the Brahma hen. The only difference is we're going to take all this fluff off the bottom just so it doesn't get trapped on accident. That can create a headache for you. And we'll just separate it a little closer to the stem. Let's go ahead and tie this in. Fold it over. A little bit more stem sticking out than I want. Just trying to squeeze a lot in here in shorter time. So again, we're going to hold and full, double all this hackle over. Now the tips of the Brahma hen, they're typically pretty fragile too, so you want to make sure that you're at least aware of that. And you're teasing it out. And you just want to get about the same, 2.5 wraps, something like that. Whatever you got room for. A lot of that's going to depend on how many wraps it takes for you to tie in material, or you feel comfortable tying in material. And sometimes it just takes extra practice to learn to trust your thread and what you're doing. And that's a real thing. I think a lot of tires go through that. And again, now we'll fold it to the back. And we just build our little head. I'm not trying to make this ridiculously nice so we can move on to what I think is the really fun one. And that's when we're going to... So here's a layer, right? We've got this layered in 2 layers. You can kind of see how it all works together. Okay, so last one. Let's take this out. And so this one, what we're going to do is we're going to blend this. We're going to blend the 2 feathers together at the same time. This can take some patience and some real practice. So, but I wanted to leave you with something that gives you something to shoot for if you like the look of it. And then we can talk about caddis and so on and so forth briefly. So these are kind of like the tailed flimps. Realistically, if it's got a tail, it's meaning to represent a mayfly or potentially a stonefly, something like that. Caddis do not have tails. But okay, so now I've got my little ball there. So again, I'm going to turn to my CDC. Create that breaking point. Tie this in on the side with a couple of wraps. Now I'm going to go to my Brahma hen again. And it's the same thing. We're going to strip out the fuzz. These are some fun options. These are some really fun options. I got a buddy, Shane Couch, and he just loves these things. Really loves these flies. Now, what I like to do on this is you need to determine, one, which way you're wrapping your hackle. Either way potentially is fine, but if you want your hackle to come out on top, if your feather is on the tire side, you want it to be, and I haven't played with this on the other side, or I'd tell you, but it's probably the same. You want your front hackle to be on the bottom. So you could tie it in either way, right, as long as they're layered appropriately. So when they wrap together, your speckled fiber is on the outside. You could do it vice versa. This is really up to you. I'm just trying to point out that if you change the methodology of what you're doing here, the look of the bug is going to change as well. So I'm going to fold that over and tie it into the back. And we'll trim out these tips one more time. And this is my favorite look. And then what you can do is you just double these both at the same time. Sometimes you need to wet your fingers to pull them. When you do this, be gentle. I know it looks like maybe I'm manhandling these. I'm really not. I'm being very, very gentle. And now we're going to wrap. I'm going to do the same thing. Put my finger in place to hold them. They're going to twist together. And now I can grab them. Try not to play with them too much, but with everything in my way, it's a little difficult. And I'm going to do it again. And again. I'm going to bring this guy way up front. I'm going to back that off a little bit. So as I work forward, you can start to see how this layers or blends all these fibers together really nicely. Get some really nice effects. Now, I'm getting really close to behind the eye. And you can do that. I'm also going to kind of reverse course and kind of come back over what I just did just a little bit. So that I get a little bit more CDC. Just poking out front there. And this is very challenging. If you've never done this, it's very challenging. You got to really pay attention to where everything's sitting, everything's laying. You got to make sure you're not capturing or trapping any barbs. That everything's flowing where you want it, when you want it, kind of thing. I'm going to go ahead and get 3 turns in on this one, just because there's so much there. I want to pinch everything and just get some pressure on my bobbin. pull straight down so that I have it. It's all being held on by this tension. I'm going to draw everything to the back. Place a few wraps in directly behind the eye. Now what I can do on stuff like this is I like to bring in my fingernail clippers and just trim that out. And get my fingers just a little wet. Draw everything to the back. And I'm going to start to build this head. I don't mind when I do this to build my head right on top of my cut point. You can kind of see my cut point there. I wasn't able to get totally close clipping them out at the same time. But as I start to build my head, I can come back in and trim that down a little bit. Sometimes you got to do stuff like that. Just be careful not to clip your thread. And then instead of just aimlessly wrapping, actually take aim at what you're trying to hide and bring your thread wraps through more precisely. Excuse me. More precisely. Until you cover up what you're looking to cover up. Is a little bit bigger than I wanted, but I'll take it. Now to secure this all down on something like this, I know I've been preaching be careful of that CDC, but you also got to make sure that this doesn't come undone. And so I wet whip these almost every time, like I do most flies. Oop. I'm going to work my head to the back a little bit. There we go. Boy, my voice is just getting a little scruffly. Yeah, that head's a little bit bigger than I wanted, but sometimes that stuff happens. As long as the eye is clear, you should be okay. So that's not horrible. So now when you're all done and you're kind of teased out, you can get it to look like this. And if it's too much and you don't like, you know, how thick that is, once your glue dries, pull everything forward. And what I like to do is I like to start trimming a little bit from the inside so that we're losing the inner part, not the outer part. Because if you start to trim the outer part, it's going to leave gaps. So we come in and groom a little bit here and, you know, thin a little bit out there. But as long as you're pulling this forward and we're trimming the stuff that's actually like touching the thorax, you don't have quite as much, I should say you're not going to have the issue of trimming out anything up front, which is, I think for a lot of people, like where they feel like they need to go. It's like, oh, let's trim this out up here. No, let's trim this out in the back, underneath. A little bit different technique on grooming, but it works well. And so now, when you have it, you're still getting the benefit of all of that material that we just trimmed out. There's going to be like little stubs in there. It's just going to help keep this thing popped open. And hopefully more of an angle of like a true like wet fly. If you're interested in putting wings in or something like that, kind of like a traditional wet fly, I have seen some flimps with a wet fly. You can do that with this type of pattern that we just did right here. Pardon me. My throat's just super dry. So you can do something like that. If your fibers are too long and you don't like that, again, use the fingernail method and pinch those away. And then one other thing, and then we'll call this one good. So if you get on the water and you say, since this has a tail, it's more in line with like a mayfly hatch because of the tail. Don't be afraid to come. Oops, sorry. Don't be afraid to come in and just trim that tail out right at the base. You can do this right on the water side with a little pair of nippers or a pair of scissors. So, with all that said, that's it. Lots and lots of options for you to explore there. You could really camp out on this type of pattern for a very long time. I think these really were developed in like the late mid 70s, something like that. Maybe I should have taken a note down and and actually looked that up for you. But so this is kind of a wet fly / nymph type pattern. Lots of things you can do with it. Lots of fun you can have. Color combinations, so on and so forth, and you can fish a lot of things with a pattern like this. So, and that's it. We'll let it go at that. So, can't wait to see you for week 6, where we get into a parachute CDC pattern. And glad you've been following along. Really appreciate you. And as always, happy tying. Take care. And we will see you in week 6.